Hey, good morning, everyone. It's me again. I want to share a few thoughts with you from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Hey, before I do, I guess you probably hear Snickers in the background. I guess he's found a dog outside that he's not happy with. Anyway, happy Labor Day. I hope you have a great day today. As I said, I want to share a few thoughts with you from chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians. And in our section for today, Paul is beginning a brand new section. This section is all about exhortation to holy living. That's chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. We're talking about the first 5 verses today. And here, Paul is giving us admonitions in matters of practical Christian living. This is the praxis section of his letter. This is the action. This is where he says, I want you to live a certain way. Here are some practical suggestions for living. Holy living. This is what he stresses in this particular paragraph. Holy living. What is holiness? What does it mean to be holy? Two things I want us to think about, just briefly. First of all, to be holy means to be set apart for God's service. So when I recognize that I am here to serve God, that tells me that I'm involved in holiness. But also, holy living is all about being separated by life and conduct from the unbelieving world around us. We live a different way than the unbelievers live around us. We are to be holy in our conduct and in our life. And you'll notice that in this section, this is one of Paul's big emphases. He wants these new Christians at Thessalonica to be morally pure, to be holy in the way they live. I want to share with you just a few things that really strike me in this section. And the first is the reminder of God's authority. Did you notice that? In verses 1 and 2, for example, Paul says, here's how you ought to live, and here's how you ought to please God. And we told you how you ought to do these things. There's a lot of talk here about what we ought to do. And Paul relies upon God's authority. He says God is our moral authority. And did you notice verse 8? Well, of course you haven't noticed it because we haven't been there in our reading yet. But in verse 8, Paul is going to say, now if you reject what I'm writing here, you're not rejecting human authority. You're rejecting God's authority, who gives His Spirit to live in us. One of the great emphases in this particular paragraph is the authority of God. And friends, I believe we need to be reminded today of God's authority, that He is our moral authority. And of course, we must respect His authority. I think that message needs to be heard loud and clear today. How about you? Do you feel the same way? There's something else that strikes me here in this passage, and it is that knowing God is to make a difference in the way we live. And you'll notice here in our reading for today in verse 5, is it? Yes. We don't live like the Gentiles or the heathens because we know God. And the heathen people don't know God. And because of that, Paul says, we ought to live a certain way. Hey, knowing God makes a difference in the way we live. Knowing God calls us to a higher standard of morality. And knowing God gives us a certain level of mastery over our desires and our conduct and our bodies. Knowing God makes all the difference, Paul says. I want to leave you this morning with this thought. I want you to notice in verses 1 through 8 of chapter 4 how many reasons Paul gives for holy living. I mean, there are so many reasons here. Just count them up. See how many you can find. I think it's interesting, the kind of motivation and the kind of rationale he provides in this passage for living in a way that honors God. And may we all honor God today. Hey, I'll see you again in a few days. God bless.